That was quite something. Okay. Thank you. I feel good. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thanks to all of you for coming out to hear me. I am really flattered. Kofi, welcome back to Macalester. It has been a pleasure to have you here. It's a privilege to be able to name the Institute for Global Citizenship in your honor, and it's a privilege for me to be able to have this conversation with you. I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about leadership. It's clear from looking back on your own time at Macalester that even as a student, you were drawn to positions of leadership and to questions of leadership. I have heard from your classmates that they predicted you would become president of Ghana. So clearly you've been a disappointment.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, based upon your long experience of both being a leader and interacting with leaders, what you think are the essential qualities of a good leader now and at any point in our history?
I think it was easy for my classmates to suggest me for president of Ghana when they didn't have to vote. But as I encourage all the students today, we should vote, and we should not we should not confuse our likes on social media with votes. We should really be very serious. I think on the question of leadership, I would say a good leader must above all have good judgment. Judgment is extremely important. An individual can have all the qualities. If they don't have judgment, you are in trouble. Mm-hmm. So I'll put judgment.
So in other words, we're in trouble.
So you need good judgment, a keen sense of what is right and what is wrong. You need discipline. You need compassion. And the individual must also be concerned about the community and about service. Leadership is about service. It's not about the individual who is the leader. And we have to understand that, a bit like democracy and leadership, people vote for you and then trust you with a certain power, which can be removed tomorrow at the next voting. So when leaders begin to behave as if it's a right that they have, it is wrong. Mm-hmm. Leadership is about service. Good leaders must also be good listeners. They must observe. And above all, a good leader must also be a good follower. Mm-hmm. It's counterintuitive, but a good leader cannot always be right. You cannot win all the time. There are people around you with ideas, and it may even come from further afield. If they are good ideas and they are right, you follow them. And you have to follow them for them to follow you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But not many leaders understand this. They think it's a sign of weakness. Mm-hmm. And they need to be tough and strong. Mm-hmm. That's not leadership.
Now, you mentioned tough and strong, and we seem to be living through a moment, and not just mm-hmm. in this country, but around the world.
Yeah.
Where there is a resurgence of what one might describe as strong leaders. Leaders who perhaps have tendencies toward autocratic rule. Mm. And yet, many people seem to vote for them, many people seem to choose them. What do you think is the attraction at this particular moment of that version of a strong leader?
I think the politicians who are populist, xenophobic, push nationalist ideas are tapping into something. They realize that there is a large segment of the population that are unhappy, that are frustrated, that feel they have been left behind. And the world is changing and changing very fast. And so they are disoriented, and they are really not getting any expression of hope and help from their leaders. And so they are desperate, and they listen to the individual who comes up and promises easy solutions. Mm-hmm. And here I will have to blame, to some extent, the mainstream leaders who are not engaging with the people. There is a tendency for mainstream politicians sometimes to chase the extremist politicians on the right or on the left, thinking that's where the votes are. And yet, if you speak to the people honestly, they will not get it. We have two good examples. Canada is one. Trudeau was running third. Nobody thought he would win. And he started engaging honestly with the people, telling them what he saw as the issues of the nation and what he was going to deal with them. And he won. Macron in France did the same thing. You had the two extremes. He had his en marche movement, speaking to the people, indicating what reforms he's going to push through, including the labor reforms he's pushing that has led to strikes in France. But he did tell them from the beginning, and they voted for him. Mm-hmm. And so if you engage with the people and explain to them, yes, the job you had is gone, it's not coming back. Coal is not coming back. Some jobs went to China, but most of the jobs have been eliminated through innovation and technology. So to tell them there'll be new jobs coming, but it will require training. We will train you for it. These are the plans. When they know there are plans and somebody is thinking and working with them on their future, it gives hope. Mm-hmm. But when that conversation is not taking place, there's a tendency to look for the savior who can come in one form or the other with loose promises that will never be fulfilled. I think the social contract between government and the people has broken down in many countries, mm-hmm. and it has to be reestablished. Trust is gone. Trust has to be reestablished.
And do you think that social contract has broken down, and we seem to be either arriving at or returning to an image of this kind of strong person leader, in part because of the really sharp increase in global inequality that has evolved over the last several decades?
Yeah, inequality, and I think this was highlighted by the 28 financial crisis, and it exacerbated it. And so inequality is a big, when you go and tell people that the top 1% or 2% have as much wealth as the other 98%, it's almost a provocation mm-hmm. For some people. And we need to, as a society, to come up with ideas on how we come up with progressive taxation or system that would help the poor. Mm-hmm. In the past, whether it was at the time of the Industrial Revolution or at the end of World War II, governments had the courage to set up safety net to protect those who have fallen through the nets. Today, there are lots of people who feel they have fallen through the nets or are going to fall through the net, but nobody seems to be caring about them because that conversation is not taking place. And it is frightening, it is frustrating, and they tend to go for the so-called strong leader mm-hmm. who makes facile promises that they have no idea how they are going to keep.
Right. Now, with your foundation, you've had a very strong focus on the development of youth leadership. Mm-hmm. Is your view that the best way to develop a new kind of leader is to start with children when they're very young and begin to teach them what leadership really means?
Yeah, I think the young women and men of today are really people of their times. They understand things that my generation and others probably do not. They have much more information than I had at their age, although I sometimes have a feeling that we were probably a bit more mature at their age, and they have more knowledge than we had, you know. And I think the next stage is for the new generation to take over. And they understand their world. They know what is going on and what is likely to come. And I think we should encourage them to get involved and begin to take over. I firmly believe that you are never too young to lead. And there are lots of examples in this country and around the world today. And so encouraging young people with capacity and desire and willingness to play a role and to lead is extremely important. And we should listen to them, because we have a tendency not always to listen to them. If I have a legal problem, I go to a lawyer. Accountant problem, I go to an accountant. But until recently, if there's a youth problem, we take the decisions for them. We don't consult them. But I think that is beginning to change. And also the leadership skills or inventive skills of some of these young people, if you link it up with mature politicians, a lot can be done.
Another hallmark of your Macalester experience was the extent to which you seemed so thoroughly to immerse yourself in the culture, not just on campus, but in the country, in the state and the country. When you were here, you were very active in a range of activities. You went out into rural Minnesota and did homestays. You participated in what was called the Ambassadors for Friendship program, where you got in a car and you drove across the country. What importance did you see then in encountering people whose backgrounds, whose views, whose life experiences were different from your own? How's that informed your work, and perhaps what lessons can we learn now about that?
Honestly, I found it fascinating to be working with people from different countries, different cultures, different religion. I found it exciting, and I was curious to learn from them, and I have not lost that curiosity. I've always been curious. So working with people from other countries and learning from them was extremely important. And so having lived on campus and worked with all these students, later on when I joined the United Nations, the idea of working in an organization with over 180 different nationalities wasn't so shocking or so strange. And also when we were here, at one point we decided living in Minnesota and getting to know Minnesota doesn't mean you know the United States. And that's when we had the Ambassadors for Friendship project. The Ambassadors for Friendship project was initiated and pushed by a man called Harry Morgan. Harry Morgan used to work for Reader's Digest. And he was quite creative in a way. He managed to get lots of people to help set up that trip. Romney's father, George Romney, gave us a brand new station wagon, Rambler station wagon, to take us around the States. Standard Oil of New Jersey gave us free gas. Hilton said where there are Hilton hotels we could stay. Families invited us to stay. At one point, we even tried to stay in a prison to have a sense of the conditions in the prison. But the ward wouldn't have us. She said, I've been on this job for 20 years. This is the first time I see a group of people volunteer to be locked up. But I suspect he thought we had ulterior motives. And so we ended up as Salvation Army for the night also, just to have various experiences. We went to Las Vegas, for example, where the owner of Desert Inn gave us hospitality and accommodation. And he did something else for us. There were 6 of us. He gave us each $100 to gamble. And he said, if you gamble long enough, I will get every cent back. He didn't define how long enough was. But at one point, all of us were doing, at one point, I had $600 in my hands. I lost all that plus $20 of my own. So all of us lost our money, except one student, a Greek student, who pocketed 100 and didn't gamble. So when he met us the next morning and said, what did you do? He went around the room and we all shared our experience with him. Indeed, all of us who gambled for long enough lost everything, plus some for him. Yeah. And the Greek guy who didn't gamble, he was furious. He said, I didn't give you the 100 for you to make money. I wanted to give you an education. And he was right. I mean, after that experience, you have to be a fool to go to a casino to gamble. Because basically he was telling us, the house always wins, right, and you will lose, right, and don't waste your time and money. So we had lots of interesting experiences, and we came back here really with a sense. In fact, I think, we also ended up in the Democratic, Jerry, we ended up at the Democratic Convention where Kennedy got the nomination. So we were in the Coliseum when he got the nomination, which was a fascinating experience, you know.
So if any of you want to see a picture of that station wagon and a young Kofi Annan wearing sunglasses and looking unspeakably cool, as you walk out the door and go to your left, there are banners hanging in the atrium, and one of the banners has a picture of that Ambassadors for Friendship group standing with Harry Morgan outside that station wagon, so you can take a look at it. Talking about that trip on a more serious note, so you came to the United States in 1959 as a black man. And as you know, race has been and continues to be, in my view, in many ways, the defining feature of American history. How did you experience that as a young black African man coming to Macalester, coming to Minnesota, and then driving across the country at that time in our history?
It was an exciting period to be in America. And you must remember, I had come from Africa that was going through the struggle for freedom and independence. And my own country had become independent just 2 years before I left. Ghana was independent in '57, and the struggle for independence had come through. So the question of racial tensions and the civil rights movement resonated quite a lot with me and with lots of the students coming from Africa or from outside the US. And one was apprehensive as to how that is going to affect one's life and one's educational prospects. At Macalester itself, I never felt it. But the community here was also quite good. But there were instances where it was a bit difficult. I remember once I had gone and I wanted a haircut. It was a white barber who said, I don't want to cut your hair. And I said, but I need a haircut, and I insisted. And he said, okay. So I sat there, and he gave me one of the worst haircuts I have had, and I had to go and buy a hat for a while. Was he genuinely incompetent? Was it deliberate? But anyway, I went and bought a hat. I have had situations on the trip where we stopped somewhere. I think it was Arizona or somewhere. We went to eat something, and we sat at the bar, and there were two women, an older one and a younger one. And the older one telling the young girl, "You tell them." And she said, "I can't." So "I'm telling you to tell them." And we were a quite international group. So she came in and said, "We don't serve blacks, but we will serve the others." And of course, we all refused to eat and went out. The only experience I had here once, we went for a walk on the waterfront on the lake with a Swiss friend and a German friend. And young men in the boat came in, started shouting at her, "What are you doing with that black thing?" and all that. And I think they were started throwing beer cans at her. So we left, came, and quite a few of the young foreign students said, "Let's go and beat them up." I said, if you do that, you give them a course. So in the end, we didn't go. But so you do run into that sort of experience. But where you are not even directly involved, when you read and see what happens to others, it shakes you and say, how can they behave this way? How can they treat anybody like this? And of course, in those days, people who I went out with or saw were more inclined to introduce me as an African, stressing that he's a foreigner. It shouldn't really matter whether I'm locally black American or African. We are both black. And the treatment of blacks should be respectful and decent as we react towards others.
One of the things that Jerry Crawford mentioned when he introduced you and talked about your Nobel Prize was your focus at the United Nations on human rights. And one of the other things that we're seeing right now is the development of a foreign policy in this country that has devalued the importance of human rights. I'm wondering what role you think a consideration of human rights should play in the formation of a foreign policy. Is it simply a matter of altruism, or do you think there is a more practical, self-interested reason for considering human rights in the development of foreign policy?
Human rights is essential for all of us. I and the foundation believe that healthy and democratic societies are built on three pillars: peaceful and stable society, inclusive development, rule of law, and respect for human rights. Because honestly, you cannot have inclusive development without stability and peace. And you cannot have development without peace and stability. And both are rooted, must be rooted in rule of law and respect for human rights. Because no society can long prosper without respect for rule of law and human rights. So when we encourage and get governments to strengthen rule of law and human rights, we are really getting them to build on strong foundations. When I talk to corporate leaders who sometimes in geopolitical terms may be looking at country X, sometimes you hear, oh, take Tunisia. Tunisia is a wonderful country, is peaceful, its GDP is doing well, growth is good, and there's stability. They never mention rule of law, which is key. And when we saw what happened in Tunisia, it was because of that lack of rule of law and lack of human rights, which is really the foundation. So when we encourage others to strengthen human rights, to develop their human rights, and as Secretary General, I helped reform the human rights sector of the UN. We are helping build solid, healthy societies, which when we link up with other societies, builds a solid international community. And so encouragement on human rights is an important activity, and I hope we will encourage government. We cannot impose it, but we can encourage them to develop their own democracy, building on rule of law.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues right now related to challenges around human rights, of course, is the issue of displacement, refugees, and of course, in the United States and Europe, it's become an incendiary issue. What is your view of the way more developed countries like the United States or like Western European countries should view the issue of the refugee crisis? Is there well, clearly there's a role for us to play. What should that role be? What should our attitude be about both helping the people where they are and also accepting the people here?
We are facing real crisis with refugees and migrants. And it's very sad to see the way we are treating migrants and refugees today. The understanding, the compassion that societies had for them immediately after the World War II is almost vanished now. The Geneva Convention is not respected by many. US, which is a nation of immigrants, is now turning its back on migration. I have a poster in my office. I will send you one. It's a picture of a man with the inscription, "A bundle of belongings is not the only thing a refugee comes with." And you look at that picture, it was Einstein, we could have kept him out. And you never know whom you are keeping out. And also, honestly speaking, migration has been going on from time immemorial. I half seriously and half jokingly remind everyone that we all came from Africa. We are all sons and daughters of Lucy, and have been walking since then, spreading across the world. And that movement, that migration will continue. What we need to do is to find a way of managing the migration effectively, manage it in a manner that will be in the interest of the country of origin, country of transition, and country of final destination, and above all, in the interest of the migrant. And once we have accepted migrants in our midst, we should find a way of settling them. We should make them work. Migrants are often very courageous people. It's not easy to leave home. It's often the most adventurous, the young, the creative, who leave their countries. And if we put them to work, our citizens will not be upset that their tax money is looking after somebody who is able-bodied and is not working when they are working. But I think economic conditions are also such that people have a feeling the outsiders are coming to take our jobs or are depressing salaries and wages. And therefore they resent it. But again, with leadership, you can do a lot here. And I would hope that the leaders will be honest with the people. All the countries, particularly in Europe, Japan and others, are going to need lots of migrants. They cannot keep out migrants and maintain their current economic standard of living. So it's not a question of choice. It's going to become a question of necessity. So we need to plan ahead. We also need to work with the countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to develop their economies in such a manner that they can create jobs for the young women and men so that they don't have any incentive or inducement to move out. Asia is doing well now. The big exodus was during the boat people from Vietnam and Cambodia. And in those days, we were very generous. In those days, I was working with the High Commission for Refugees. And the US took in thousands of them. Europe did. The screening was done in Cambodia, in Thailand, or in Asia somewhere. And then we flew them in. And it was very smooth. And I'm sure most of them are making good contributions to their new communities. And I would urge us to look at the positive aspects of migration. It's not easy. I mean, last year I was in Germany, in Berlin, with a group of elders, and we visited a refugee camp. Of course, the refugees wanted to work, but there was a language barrier. Several companies had agreed to take on the refugees with skills and teach them language on the job, which was a good model if others could do it. Others had no such option. And then you also discover that there are two groups of refugees. The young ones who feel this is a second chance and I have a new home and should make the best of it, were pushing to learn the language and pick up skills. You have the older ones who always thought, this is temporary, I'm going to go back home. And temporary could be 5, 10 years. So they don't learn the language, and they really become a burden. And one has to find a way of dealing with that group as well.
Is there any country in the world that you know of that is a model, a positive model in handling this?
What is interesting is some of the developed countries complain a lot about refugees and the amount of money they spend on refugees. And yet when you look at a country like Lebanon, a small country, it has 1.5 million refugees. Jordan has several million refugees. Turkey, and they manage to look after them. And in Jordan, quite a few of them are allowed to work. And sometimes they are with families, not always in camps, which also helps, which makes assimilation or settlement much easier. And so, honestly, those countries are paying much more for the refugees than the developed countries. We don't always give them the support they need. We do give support, but not adequately. Right. And I think they have lessons that we could learn.
I'd like to do a quick little tour with you of some of the more challenging places in the world right now, since you've had experience working with them. And I'll start with Syria, which is obviously...
That's the easy one.
Yeah, really easy one. You have spent time there. You have spent time trying to resolve the conflict there. Do you see any productive road forward in a country where so many people have been and continue to be suffering?
It's really tragic what's going on in Syria. I knew Syria as excuse me, allergies. It's fighting with me. No, Syria is tragic. I mean, as you know, I was involved in the Syrian crisis as an envoy and tried to help resolve it. After 6 months, I realized that I was perhaps more serious than those who gave me the job. And it's always been clear to me that a peacemaker, a mediator, cannot want peace much more than the protagonist or those who give him the job. You need to work together. And I did tell the Security Council that this is a tough job, but if we work together, we can make a difference. At the beginning, they came up with united resolution. They had one voice, but then the divisions came. And as you know, I resigned in July 2012 after 6 months. And during that 6 months period, I pushed very hard. I was in Syria talking to President Assad and the others. I first came up with a 6-point plan, trying to build peace from the bottom up, asking them not to bring heavy weapons into the cities, release political prisoners, allow humanitarian aid, and press to do their work, and a whole host of things. Everybody accepted, saying the only game in town is a 6-point plan, but was verbal. There was really no support for it. And it was also difficult to build from the bottom because you had several parties involved. In fact, Assad asked me this question. He said, "You're asking us to sign on and we are signed. You know where we are. How do you make sure that the different militia will respect what you are doing?" And the only thing I could say is I would talk to the countries that have influence with them, the countries that are supporting them. And that didn't prove to be fruitful. So I changed tact and decided instead of building it from the bottom, one should build it from the top. And contacted the governments involved, including the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, because I felt the best way to go is to bring the key players internationally, the regional powers, and the Syrian parties together and get them to agree a common framework on how we resolve this conflict. Because it was obvious to me in 2012 that neither side was in a position of winning the war. Neither side was in a position to give a knockout punch to the other. And therefore, you needed to bring them together and for them to work on a common cause. Because if one side pushed a peace deal, the other side would reject it. And in a way, I was hoping that they could repeat the European experience. Because at the end of the 30-year war, the Europeans realized they were destroying each other and the continent. And they met in Wiesbaden and came up with the treaty Westphalia. They met in Westphalia and came up with the Treaty of Westphalia, which brought the war to an end. But they all had to move in the same direction. And I hope that somehow or the other, we will find a way of giving the Middle East its Westphalia moment, where they all move in the same direction and realize this senseless war is leading nowhere, and neither side is going to win, and really sign a peace agreement and settle. And I also firmly believe that in war, all are losers, including those who claim to be victorious. Because when you look at Syria today, the victorious takes over a broken society, destroyed cities, broken lives. And was that worth it? Anyway.
I'll give you another easy one, the Korean Peninsula. What do you make of what is going on there right now?
Yeah. First of all, I think the developments, particularly between South and the North Koreans, has been positive. And I hope it will be sustained. The next phase is a meeting between Kim and President Trump. Both sides are maneuvering. Statements are being made in the press. Some people are speaking for others. The principals themselves are not speaking. We've heard a lot about what the South Koreans want to do. We've heard a lot about denuclearization, indirectly from South Korea and from the US government. I haven't heard it from the North Koreans, who have put lots of resources and effort into developing their nuclear weapons. So we know what Washington and South Korea is going to ask for, but we are not quite sure what the North Koreans want. This is negotiations. Each side will come to the table with claims. It is quite likely that the North Koreans would also say, we would want US nuclear coverage lifted, US military presence reduced, and a whole set of demands. Would Washington react to this? Would Washington accept this? And when you talk of denuclearization, does it mean they are going to stop further development of their nuclear program? Or does it mean they are going to stop and dismantle what they already have, which has been a long time development from grandfather to father and him? I really don't see that. And so I think we are going to have tough negotiations. The two leaders may come up with a communique of some sort, but the details will take lots of time to work out. We saw how long it took to get an agreement on the Iranian nuclear issue. And there are very specific details which have to be worked out. And so I think we have to wait and see. But it is not going to be as easy as sometimes it's made to seem. The only thing is, it will require patience. It will require series of meetings, and perhaps a year or two to come to a full-fledged agreement. I'm also worried about the indication in Washington that they are going to walk away from the Iranian deal. Walk away from the Iranian deal at a time when you are inviting the North Koreans to come and sign a similar sort of agreement with you. What confidence can they have that the agreement will not be torn up the way the Iranian agreement is being torn up? Would you blame them for being cautious and doubting this? And in fact, if that agreement is torn up, it really undermines international law. But I would hope that should the US decide to isolate itself, the other parties, the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, will stick with it. Of course, US could always make it difficult for them with implementation, but the world will be a better place if they stick with it and get Iran to stay in it rather than get Iran also to walk away and feel that they are free to resume their nuclear program, which will bring incredible tension in the region. We know the attitude of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the others.
So one more spot. You devote a lot of your time, and the foundation devotes a lot of its time to focusing on issues in Africa, a place that Americans in general don't know very well. What is your view? How optimistic are you about the future of Africa? I was just listening to a talk that Macalester alum, who will be speaking at commencement later this week, Fred Swaniker, gave.
Oh, yeah.
And he made the point that in about 25 years, Africa combined, not China, not India, Africa will have the largest workforce in the world. So clearly...
Largest population.
Right. So clearly there's the potential there for an enormous economic engine. What will it take to get that engine running? How close are we to that point?
I think it will take a good leadership and good macroeconomic policies. It will take a training and education of the population. And I've been encouraging African governments a lot not to necessarily always focus on everybody getting a university education. Vocational training is extremely important. It's done incredible things for Germany, Switzerland, and the others. Because if somebody has gone to a vocational school and has a skill, when they come out and they cannot find a job, invariably they create something for themselves with a group of friends. And so you have many small companies being created. And it is often these small companies that create lots of jobs. And so the training and I would want to see a situation where the West and the developed world links up with Africa on the question of education, small-scale industries, development and expansion. About 15 years ago, I was invited to speak at the European Parliament. I was given the Sakharov Prize. I did not tell them what subject I was going to speak about, but my subject was migration, challenging them to be more open and try to manage migration effectively. There was a former French minister in the parliament, Charles Pasqua. So Charles asked me, Mr. Secretary General, don't you think the solution is for us to work and develop Africa and create jobs there so that people do not have inducement to leave? I said, I'll be very happy to see that, and we'll all be happy to work with you on that. And that is still valid. And some governments get it, and they are trying to go into areas and industries that create jobs so that the young people can stay home and make opportunity, have a good life. And in fact, what is also happening is that in some situations, we are getting the reverse brain drain. All the young Africans who've worked in the US and others, if a country stabilizes economically, they are very happy to go back. So we need to try and ensure that we create the environment at home, the opportunities at home, to attract them to come back and help develop the countries. And you are right, Africa is going to be the largest. By the year 2050, there will be 2 billion Africans. At the end of the century, 4 billion. And when people talk of the youth bulge and the population bulge, and it will be an economic dividend, it can only be an economic dividend if you handle it right. If you don't handle it right, it can also be a disaster. So I think we need to start taking family planning seriously. We need to work on preparing people for the future. We need to take area of agriculture. 60% of the arable land in the world today is in Africa. And yet we import $35 billion of food a year when we can, with proper organization, grow food to feed ourselves, as well as become part of the global food security system. So there is work to do, and I think the African leaders and the Africans are ready, but our partners should work with us.
Another subject that you alluded to briefly earlier was social media, and you and I have talked a little bit about this. You came actually to Macalester from Silicon Valley, where you had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg, so he stepped up to join all of us. How are you feeling right now about the role of social media, both in the proper functioning of democracies, and also just in the creation of culture? You and I are not expert users of social media, but we can see the impact of it.
Yeah. No, I think social media has great potential. It can be used positively, but we also have to admit it can be used negatively. When we talk of open borders and open systems, we always think it's the positive forces that would use these open borders. We have, the UN has an office in Vienna, and that office deals with drugs, terrorism, corruption, and a whole series. All these things are centered. So I sort of dubbed that office, and at that time we were talking a lot about civil society. So I said, now we are creating an office for uncivil society, and we need to pay attention to them too, because they can create lots of problems for us. I think on elections and digital technology, and I'm not necessarily limiting my comments to what is going on in the States and the alleged Russian involvement, but if you have a system where people can be corralled into echo chambers and reinforce their prejudices, and when you look at the things that go viral, it's usually some negative things of anger, fear, racism, or tribal. Those go viral very quickly. When you do that, you are making it very difficult for democracy to work the way it should, because in effect, it makes it difficult to have sensible conversation on issues of importance, to be able to come to a compromise, because you are dealing with groups and each of them have their own worldview of where things are. And therefore, the question of how that system is used and the lies which are sometimes told on it is very, very worrying. So one has to have a system of weeding out the blatant lies which sometimes affect how people vote. And the danger is not only weeding out the lies, but if I'm a voter and I have a feeling that elections could be interfered with directly or indirectly by groups of people playing games with social media and influencing how, why should I go and vote? Even today, before this became a real issue, some people don't vote because they are not sure their votes count. And it is very important that we do. There are other issues related to social media and big data and micro-targeting and privacy issues. I mean, I don't want to dwell on that, but who owns that data? On privacy issues, how do people feel? And we saw what Oxford, Cambridge Analytica did. And so I'm happy to say that the tech companies I spoke to are also concerned about this and want to do something about it. And my sense is we are probably going to have some regulations coming, because with each new invention has been followed by a regulation, whether it's a printing press, the radio, or television. And I suspect we're going to see regulation on social media. But how do you handle that? Do you do it nationally, or you find a way of linking countries up internationally with some common understanding? The European Union has started. They are being very aggressive and forward, leading the way on internet regulation. The Germans have their rules, and we'll see what happens here.
Let me finish up by, we've been talking about weighty subjects. Everyone thinks of Kofi Annan as going into places like Syria and dealing, as you do, with very serious issues. What does Kofi Annan do for fun?
Music. I listen to music. Nan and I walk. In a way, it's a shame I wasn't as good a skier as she was to be able to keep up with her. And the last time I skied I tore my rotator cuff and had to have an operation. And in a way, by not skiing, I've also slowed her down. But we love walking, we love hiking, and listening to music and reading. Yeah.
Great.
And I watch soccer. I don't play anymore. Now we both sit and watch soccer and applaud the teams. Good.
So I'm going to try something I've never tried before. There are probably about 3,000 people in the room. Some of you may know that, that the Secretary General only recently celebrated his 80th birthday. We weren't there. But had we been there, we would have sung Happy Birthday. So, can we do it? All right. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
This is nice.
Happy birthday, dear Kofi. Happy birthday to you.
This is the first time I've had this many people sing happy birthday to me. You probably have to be 80 to get it.
Salam. Nya Ke Tang Ying. Amani. Peace. Peace is the beauty of life, a vision for our world, the light of our future. Mr. Annan, thank you for standing in your truth. Thank you for sharing your light with us. Thank you for being a beacon of hope. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce 4 students who will deliver the peace prayer, a Macalester tradition, one that is a fitting close to this afternoon's program. Miriam Osman, class of 2018, will read the prayer in Arabic. Kevin Zhang, class of 2018, will read the prayer in Hmong. Arnold Sanginga, class of 2019, will read the prayer in Swahili. Hannah Gray, class of 2018, will read the peace prayer in English.
كما نستمر معاً على رحلتنا في ماكاليستر، دعونا نتغذى على طول الطريق من سنوات الصداقة والتعليم. دعونا نتعلم من هذه السنوات لنخلق عالماً أكثر عدالة وسلامة. عالماً مليئاً بالزمالة والقرابة مع الاحترام والعطف لبعضنا البعض. دعونا نأمل لغد أفضل. آمين.
Từ cho cái bê ta, ở cái tàu lũ chế cần đỡ Macalester, sao có bê chỉ cho lòng đỡ mua cái phong yêu thế cái cỡ, sao có bê chỉ yêu tê tê ở mua cái战争thế cái thái yên, lũ tê tê ở mua cái phong yêu thế cái sĩ trâu rong, ở mua cái sĩ hữu thế cái ở rong trâu lửa tù mua cái chia sẻ trâu nhà tầm đây.
Is Ruth here? Is Ruth here?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Tunapoendelea na safari yetu hapa Macalester, naomba miaka ya urafiki na elimu yetu izidi kutunuaisha, ili tujenge dunia iliyo na haki na amani, pamoja na ushirikiano na undugu. Dunia iliyo na heshima na uzuri kwa kila mtu. Ninayo matumaini ya siku njema zijazo.
As we continue together in our journey at Macalester, may we be nourished along the way by our years of friendship and learning, and may we draw upon them to create a more just and peaceful world, a world filled with fellowship and kinship, with respect and kindness for one another, and with the hope of a better tomorrow. Amen.
Is my microphone still working? Yes. Thank you, Kofi, for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us. Thank you for having gone to Macalester. And thank all of you for being here and for sharing this very special moment with us. Have a great afternoon.